In other words, your mix won't affect what the musicians are hearing. That's a good thing. So even if you have to solo some tracks out while the band is playing, they won't lose themselves in their headphones. In addition, the Q's pan knob allows you to pan the signal between the left and right headphone channels of the one stereo auxiliary send. If the pre button is not pressed, then the amount of signal going to the send is affected by the large VCA fader. This is useful for creating a more realistic sound with reverbs and delays, as the amount being reverberated will increase or decrease with the level of the fader. Finally, if you wish to derive the signal from the small fader rather than the large VCA, simply press down the small fader button. I know, it should be obvious, but it's apparently not. If it ain't pressed, the aux signal gets its sound from the VCA by default. Just when you thought we were done with buttons and knobs that were randomly added wherever SSL could fit them, the group trim knob makes its grand entry. This is the final gain control for all signals leaving the routing matrix. All signals bus to a particular group amp will first pass through this gain control before leaving the console. Generally, rather than using the group trim, you'll want to control the output of a signal going to a particular group amp via whichever fader is feeding the routing matrix. But if you don't want to screw up your balances, but a particular group is overloading, by all means, turn this knob down a notch or two. In another feat of British 2-for-1 engineering, the group trim knob also acts as the solo isolate button for a given channel. Yep, simply pulling up this knob will keep that module from being muted when another module is soloed. Think Rebel Rambo module that refuses to be muted by its masters and oppressors. Anyway, this is most commonly used when a particular module is being used as an effects return, to keep the reverb returns activated at all the time, even when other modules are soloed. In other words, when you solo that snare track that is also being sent to a bit of reverb, this will keep the reverb signal coming back into the mix, even when you solo the snare. Contrary to popular belief, the float button has nothing to do with root beer, or regular beer for that matter. However, it is used for bouncing, ping-ponging, or creating a submix to a spare pair of tracks. Basically, it disengages the channel fader from feeding the group amps, and instead sends the monitor fader's output to the routing matrix instead of the quad bus. This allows you to route the outputs of the monitor faders back out to an empty pair of tracks on your tape machine, and submix multiple tracks down, leaving those tracks that you just submixed now free to re-record over. Stick with me. If you've ever done this on a 4-track tape recorder, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't know what a 4-track tape recorder is, well, all hope is lost in explaining this button. The direct button is a fun one, and one that you'll use quite regularly. It can be used rather than the routing matrix for sending a signal directly to that module's group amp, and as a result, directly to that numbered track of tape. For example, if the direct button is pressed on channel 24, its output will go directly to group amp 24, and then to track 24 on the multitrack. The same goes for channels 1 to 23. You can think of this as your I don't even want to think about routing button. The benefits are that this gives a cleaner, quieter signal with a better noise floor because it doesn't go through the extra gain stage of the routing matrix. And you should use it when you can. Monitor input section. Now that we're really moving along, the Ready Group and Ready Tape button make up what we call the monitor input section. By pressing one or both of them, you can choose whether you're hearing the signal before it goes out to the multi-track recording deck or after it returns. Simple, right? The Ready Group button picks up its signal at that channel's group output, hence the name Ready Group. It lets you hear what your signal is like right after all your channel settings, like EQ, compression, gating, but before it goes out to tape. This way, the engineer does not have to loop the signal back around through the tape machine before hearing it. I know. As you're sitting there with that bewildered look on your face, you're asking, why do I want to use the Ready Group button again? Well, pretty much any recording device will alter the sound of the signal in some way, even if it's subtle. As a result, if you want to check what your signal sounds like right before it leaves the console, you can temporarily press this button. It's useful for tracking and overdubs, or when you just want to hear what your signal sounds like before going to tape. There, better? The Ready Tape button is used to listen to the output of the tape machine coming back into the recording console. This is the normal way you will listen to your tracks and signals coming back from tape, just like for every mixdown. The red record arm button is not used in our SSL console setup, but if it were, it would be really cool and would be used for record arming tracks on the tape machine. These are not in any way related to the big red button that the president presses to launch nuclear war. You can press them in fun combinations though if you feel like it will impress your client more. Small fader. As they say, people with small faders also tend to have small hands, right? As we discussed previously, the small fader can be used in either the channel or monitor path, depending on the global status selected. Again, it will typically be our channel fader in both mix and record plus VCA to monitor status. As you can see from the super small type, the From Channel Input button will get the small fader's input from the channel path right after the mic pre or line amp, but before the large VCA fader or EQ. Get it? The From Channel Input button gets its signal from the channel's input. Let that sink in for a minute so I don't get this question 100 times in class. The From Channel Output button will take its output from where? Right, from the channel's output. You're catching on quick. To be more precise, it gets its signal after the large VCA fader and after the EQ section. Now, just to throw another monkey wrench into the works, pressing both the input and output buttons will take the signal from before the large VCA fader, but after the EQ section. This is just something you have to memorize, so deal with it. And of course, you can solo or cut the small faders just like the large faders. The small CFB pan knob is used for panning between the center, front, and back speakers when the console is set up for quad surround sound. Since we don't make use of its quad surround capabilities, you won't have any use for this. You can turn it around and around if you feel like it though. Routing matrix. The routing matrix was invented by Keanu Reeves, shortly after his and Bill's excellent adventure.
Excellent!
It's found at the top of the I/O module and has 32 group amplifier or bus outputs, in addition to outputs for routing to the quad bus. It is used to select the outputs for the channel path to send to either the multitrack deck, a subgroup amp, or even external effects units via the patch bay. Don't worry, all this stuff will start to make sense in labs. In addition, a pan button and knob makes it easy to pan between even and odd tracks on your multitrack deck. This is useful for a variety of tracking and mixing situations. For example, for creating a stereo mix of multiple tracks of background vocals to only 2 tracks of tape. One could simply assign each of 4 background vocal channels to a pair of open tracks, then create the stereo mix by using the pan knob to put them at different locations in the stereo field. This can also be useful for submixing drum kits, tom-toms, overheads, or even bouncing down sections of orchestral instruments. All together now.
Excellent!
The large VCA fader is what we will typically be using to create our mixdown in either mixdown or record plus VCA to monitor mode. Like all consoles, this main fader has a solo button, a cut mute button, and a large pan knob for panning between the main left and right buses, and hence the stereo field. If this is still a foreign concept to you, now would be a good time to start questioning your choice of careers. Using the VCA assignment wheel, we can slave any of the 32 VCA faders to any of 8 VCA master volume faders in the center section of the console. This lets you control the overall volume of a group of instruments and faders with only one master VCA. For example, by setting all of my drum tracks to VCA group 8, I can then control the overall drum level of my mix by simply raising or lowering the level of master VCA fader number 8. The same could be used with groups of vocals, guitars, instruments, etc. A very cool mix technique regardless. Well, I hope you've enjoyed learning about the SSL console with us today. Check us out again later for some more in-depth coverage on the patch bay, timecode, compression, mixing, EQ, and other fun issues in the world of recording. We'll see you later.